Okay, so back in December, I did actually raise the prospect of a Switch 1 exclusive direct before a Switch 2 showcase. I must admit, though, I'd started to assume that Nintendo wouldn't really go there after waiting so long, but it does make sense to space out their announcements, especially if they have a lot of big stuff coming down the pipeline for Switch 2. The reasons for holding a Switch 1 Direct still hold true. They give these games the oxygen of publicity they need in their own right and instill confidence for existing Switch owners that their console will still receive support, even if, in reality, Nintendo's major development efforts are going to be pivoting to the new system. Nintendo also seems to have a habit recently of doing seasons of announcements, releasing several newsy things on the bounce. We saw this with Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition, Alamo, and the playtest being announced over a series of days at the end of last year. I guess they think having multiple bites of the cherry in terms of commanding attention works for them, so by focusing things on Nintendo now, they can whet the appetite of consumers for the main course next week. What I'm going to be looking for with particular interest with regard to Switch 1 is the pace of releases that they are proposing. If they have the odd game every quarter, that's going to be different from keeping up the 2 or 3 releases per quarter that they've managed as a minimum until now. I find it really hard to call exactly how hard they'll pivot to the new system because there isn't really a good precedent. They certainly supported the DS for longer into 3DS's life with games like Pokemon Black 2 and White 2, but these were still outliers even then. My central expectation is that we have a couple of games a quarter until the end of the fiscal year, but they could be much more reserved and still put out a good direct if they showcase games well into the future. This simultaneously would bolster the idea that the Switch will have support for a long time to come, while simultaneously, if there are only a handful of games and some are dated 2026, smother speculation of any late in life new era of Switch games by showing the contours of the end of the system's life. In terms of general strategy, we should remember that Nintendo is still looking to secure its online base, and so I would anticipate online play being a major focus of at least one title. I'm not sure if there's any meaningful metric to judge the likelihood of the test play game making an appearance. Unless those graphics really were just placeholders, it hardly feels like a Switch 2 game in the making, and so this might be a really interesting time to launch it as a title in its own right. I think they see the Switch Lite as essentially the model they'll be servicing from this point on, though. They will want home users to move to Switch 2, so although Switch may receive support from the more casual Switch Sports type crowd in general, it's titles that suit handheld play that it makes sense to promote, particularly ones for younger players, and the test play game may seem to fit into this camp. As to specifics, I'm not going to go into too many granular forecasts simply because I've covered the possibilities in previous videos over recent months and the fundamentals haven't changed. I'll link some of those videos at the end. Mainly in this video, I just want to reiterate where I think some of the likelier sources of new games are, based on criteria such as which studios have been quiet, and to recontextualize past observations in light of how close we are to the Switch 2's debut. I think the main assumption I've seen is that we're due a big Metroid Prime 4 blowout, and I think we absolutely are. I do think there will be some kind of Switch 2 love for Metroid Prime 4 before the end of the year. How could there not be after it's waited all these years and is releasing alongside new hardware? But it's a much easier deal to focus on the Switch 2 editions using Metroid Prime 4 footage that has already been released. Otherwise, in a Switch 2 presentation, you're splitting the attention from the specific details you're trying to show about Switch 2 by exciting people about Metroid Prime content. I'll be very interested to see if they give a date to the game as well. A date in May or June would draw huge speculation focus that it's the Switch 2 reveal date, and so I doubt they'll do that. But if they then don't date the game, that in itself suggests that it's going to be releasing on or around the Switch 2 launch. Having said that, Metroid has traditionally been an October game, and if they have other irons in the fire for Switch 2, I'd say Prime 4 is a 50% likelihood for October or the 2 months either side, September or November. I do think Camelot are overdue, and while they could be working on a Switch 2 Mario Tennis, my out there call is I think there is a decent chance that we could see something Golden Sun. I've talked as well about Yoshi's Woolly World, a low-hanging port that's one of the last remaining Wii U titles yet to get the boot across. Developers Good Feel finished up Bakaru and Princess Peach Showtime in the last couple of years, so a full new game is unlikely from them, but an enhanced port seems very possible. Kirby is another interesting one. Retail Kirby games tend to be released in the January to March quarter of the year in recent times. It's not a cast iron rule, of course, and it's not that Kirby couldn't come at other times. In particular, it should be noted that this is now the longest run without a new Kirby title in the Switch's history, owing primarily to the lack of these smaller eShop titles. Kirby Fighters 2 and Super Kirby Clash helped space out the time between Star Allies and Forgotten Land, for example. Nobody got poor betting on new Kirby games coming, but I do find it odd that they missed the current quarter, especially since it was such a quiet quarter, with such an obvious gap where a February game could have dropped. Then again, for all we know, Plan A was to have a Kirby title in February, and it was pulled back, either because it wasn't ready, or perhaps because of a different title which needed to be pushed back, causing Kirby to fall back into the May slot, for example, in replacement. Another commonly stated prediction is Fire Emblem. Fire Emblem Echoes launched in April 2017 on 3DS, and there is a certain symmetry if another Fire Emblem game comes to Switch so late in its life. While in some respects it might seem like a missed opportunity for a Switch 2 game, Fire Emblem titles have never been graphical showcases particularly, and are unlikely to leverage unique system features in a particularly strong way. So in this sense, it would only be fitting to have such a title as a forward-compatible entry for the original Switch, utilizing the large Switch install base. It's another example of a title that might fit the Switch Lite more perhaps than just the original Switch. Mario feels a little less likely to show up in a big way, as I really think at this stage they will want to do a blowout for Super Mario Bros. 40th this September. Still, something smaller could work, and remember that the late stage 3DS had 4 Mario titles in both 2016 and 2017. I have a video on my Patreon at present discussing Picross and how Jupiter are interested in celebrating Picross's anniversary this year. Could we get a revived Mario's Picross after all these years? Or, as I've widely tipped, Dr. Mario? Developer Eureka put out Endless Ocean Luminous last year, but I can't imagine these Dr. Mario titles take all that long, especially if they leverage Dr. Mario World, which has been discontinued and presumably has some good content that they could cannibalize. Of course, the Mario outing that is most widely expected, and with good reason, is a Mario sports title, probably Mario Baseball or some kind of compilation game a la Sports Superstars, another 2017 3DS game. Bandai Namco's Smash team presumably were working on something after production wrapped on Smash Ultimate, and so a Mario Baseball title, something they've had a history with, would seem like a distinct possibility. I do wonder if there's a chance that they may delve into Pokemon Legends ZA a bit too. The smart money says that they'll wait until much closer to the time of release, but it is a major Nintendo game for this year, and the reception to it seems to have been a little bit muted after the Pokemon Presents in February. They may feel like they want to show something a little bit more hype for it, just to gild the lily a bit more and get people back on track with the game, although on balance, I think it's still unlikely to show, maybe only a 30% chance. We should also recall that the April to June quarter is traditionally the time Nintendo drops an ultra-casual title. Labo, Clubhouse Games, Game Builder Garage, Switch Sports, Everybody Want to Switch, Endless Ocean Luminous, and even Jump Rope Challenge have had their time in the sun in this quarter. Now, it doesn't necessarily follow that such a game need be announced in a Switch Direct. Some are dropped onto social media with much shorter time windows. It certainly seems likely that an EPD4 game, a development team I deep dive recently, is going to be Switch 2 focused rather than Switch 1. Still, the opportunity for a Ring Fit sequel, for example, to give a victory lap to one of the Switch's most enduring hits could be tempting. I've also discussed the possibility, vague though it is, that Mages might do another adventure series for the Switch, besides Famicom Detective Club. Yes, they've already developed Famicom Detective Club, and this went really well, but they produce many of these kinds of adventure games and visual novels, and Nintendo does have other such franchises that are popular. Satoru Shibata mentioned Shin Onigashima a few years ago as one of his all-time favourite games, and I do wonder if a niche remake is possible. If you think about how Grezzo and Tantalus started on one franchise but have gradually had multiple teams geared towards Nintendo content, it shows that there is potential for mages to expand from simply the one franchise to potentially more than one. Other obscure franchises that Nintendo could still consider warrant late-in-life Switch-life comebacks include Kuro Kuro Kurin, originally developed by Pikmin 4 co-developers Eighting, and of course Rhythm Heaven. I did look into Rhythm Heaven a while ago and struggled to see where the team was that could bring it back, but I do feel like it's something that Nintendo won't want to abandon. Pushmo also deserves a mention, as that title has been absent for a long time and potentially could make a fairly easy port, given that there were Wii U versions. The likeliest source of new games is probably old games, specifically ports. We're 2 for 2 on ports and remasters in 2025, and there are some further low-hanging fruits. Metroid Prime 2 and 3 HD would make sense to announce as a Pikmin 1+2 style pack, and of course there are lots of potential GameCube and Wii ports which could make for strong late-in-life titles. I've seen some extra buzz around Star Fox Adventures or Star Fox Assault lately, and if Nintendo wanted one last Hail Mary attempt at invoking the Switch effect for Star Fox, then such a move could make sense. The difficulty is that Nintendo usually uses these kinds of remakes to build familiarity with the brand, but it seems like the gameplay really needs some clear thinking, which makes life trickier, as it's not the same case as with, say, Grezzo taking on Link's Awakening before doing an original Zelda, where they're sticking to the same basic contours of the franchise. In Star Fox's case, it is likely that a new Star Fox will be considerably different, and a breaking the convention style game which would be more likely to be handled internally at EPD, or at least in very close consultation with EPD. Another low-hanging fruit title is Wario Land Shake It. I love the original Wario Land, and personally, that would be the game I'd most love to see remade, but some love to Wario feels way overdue to me. I've recently talked about Cygames and Dragalia Lost as well. Suffice to say that I think it's unlikely that we'll see Dragalia on Switch this direct, but it's clear that the franchise has lots of fans, and it would be a great shame if Nintendo did not at least consider giving the IP a new lease on life. I had been down on the prospects of another Warriors title until someone reminded me in the comments recently that even the 3DS had Warriors alongside the main games. It's been 3 years since Fire Emblem Three Hopes, so I'd say a new Warriors title has to be a decent chance, although what this could be is harder to foresee. Fire Emblem has been tackled recently, so they could either tilt towards a new franchise such as Xenoblade or even Mario, or lean back onto Zelda. There's no Zelda title announced for this year, and Hyrule Warriors based on Tears of the Kingdom would make a lot of sense. I know some people feel there's not enough narrative to work with, but I think The Imprisoning War gives plenty of scope, and I think Age of Calamity sadly proved that they are more concerned with fan service than narrative consistency. I also think there's a decent chance that we get one last WarioWare for the system before the end of the year, although it's unusual to announce WarioWares so far out, and I don't think they'll probably do so at this juncture. But they're into having massive multiplayer casual Switch 1 games like Everybody Want to Switch and Super Mario Party Jamboree, and WarioWare is one of the few franchises they've got left which could support such gameplay. And with games in 2021 and 2023 already, it would make sense if they targeted another release in the 2-yearly gap of 2025. One oddball thing I will say is that it's been so quiet on the Animal Crossing front for such a long time that I'll never be too astonished if they do anything with that franchise, especially since I maintain that the next mainline game is still a way off. That said, I don't think they'll go back to the party well again anytime soon, partly because Amiibo Festival was a bit of a bust, and also because Nintendo Cube have been busy with other things of late. Of course, with Amiibo being reprinted recently, it opens the possibility of a long-held dream becoming a reality: an Amiibo game. Nintendo have kind of soft served the Amiibo in recent years, but they're still great fun and popular, and a game based around them would make a lot of sense to me as a way to monetize this incredible endeavor of theirs. If they were able to announce an effective price drop for the Switch by bundling them with particular Amiibo and using the Switch or Switch Lite as a vehicle to drive toy sales, it could be a pretty lucrative strategy, especially tied in to the Super Mario movie too. I'd say it's at most a 10% chance for this direct, but I will be intrigued to see if Amiibo at least warrant a mention. Nintendo Switch Online is also overdue a bit of a revamp. I think it's unlikely they will add too much of note, as although they are keen to drive people to NSO, the service seems to be reaching saturation point in terms of take-up, and is getting fairly fully featured for the price point, and so they may be reticent to add more until or unless they bump up the price. Now, they could bump up the price now, but this would seem like an odd time to invite people to jump off the service, just as they want a good customer base locked in for the console transition. Having said that, there are lots of fairly minor features that they could add. I don't think a Master System and Game Gear would thrill most people, but there are some pretty good games on both. Same with Virtual Boy. And of course, I would be absolutely head over heels in love with the concept of the Saturn coming to NSO, although I do think it's very unlikely. I think the test play game is by far the likelier option for pushing NSO unless they go for a big time revamp. So look, there's lots of options here. I certainly don't think we'll get them all, of course. I think a franchise revival of some description is a solid 30% chance, though, i.e., a Nintendo franchise not previously on Switch, such as Wario Land or Star Fox. I'd say 70% chance we get at least 3 new first-party retail titles, and if this is the last major spotlight they're going to put on Switch 1, they could well decide to show as many as 5 or 6. But look, it's not long to wait. I hope everybody has a great direct, and I will see you on the other side. Thank you for watching. Do check out these videos for more, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.